afraid of the dark.
Olivia and I were friends since school. Then we went to college, got married. Olivia's parents were wealthy, and when she got pregnant, they gifted her a 3-bedroom apartment for the future. A wonderful little boy was born, named after Olivia's grandfather, Declan. He affectionately called Decky. When the baby turned 1, Olivia and her husband moved into the newly renovated apartment for a happy family life. But the baby started falling ill frequently, being fussy and crying. Later, his tantrums escalated to the point where he would climb out of his crib and run to his parents' bedroom. Olivia complained that they couldn't get any rest because of their son. He just didn't want to stay in his room. At his grandparents' place, Decky was perfectly fine, but at home it was like he was a different child. One day, while his mother was preparing lunch, she gave the boy markers and paper to keep him entertained. When she went to check on him, she was horrified Decky had drawn a figure sitting under the bed, the entire sheet covered with black lines mixed with yellow and red. Decky couldn't explain what he had drawn, only saying the word uncle and pointing under the bed. A year passed. Psychiatrists said the child might have picked up fears from television and was projecting them onto the dark corners of the house. But the boy remained restless. At night, he consistently ran to his parents and slept between them. He had started speaking fairly well and constantly complained about a scary uncle in the dark corners. Psychologists and psychiatrists insisted that the boy was seeing negativity on TV from the world around him, but naturally, neither the specialists nor the parents wanted to believe in anything mystical. Olivia's parents tried everything to wean the child off their bed. And then Olivia took the ultimate step. She read somewhere online that if you put a child to bed and close the door, they would cry but eventually get tired and fall asleep. After explaining to her son that there was no uncle, that he had imagined everything, she left the room without turning off the light and locked the door. It was quiet for about 20 minutes, but then the boy started crying. Olivia was torn but felt she had to teach her child somehow. With tears in her eyes, she sat and waited for the boy to calm down and fall asleep. But Decky started screaming. Thinking that the neighbors would come to complain, Olivia opened the door. Her son was sitting on the windowsill, pressing against the glass, his eyes filled with tears, nervously sobbing. And there were fresh bruises on his arms and legs. Stuttering, the child continued to speak about the scary uncle who crawled out from under the bed and wanted to bite him and take him away. Exhausted from her son's phobias, the next morning Olivia took him back to the doctors. Despite being deprived of cartoons by his parents, Decky hadn't seen anything scary. He also didn't look at frightening pictures. How did this terrifying fear settle in the child's mind? The doctor shrugged. Some believed that the parents were abusing the child, but he said that his mom and dad had never hit him. The neighbors described the family as positive. There was no evidence except for the bruises. The mother and child went to a sanatorium for a week's rest. There, the boy was calm and slept independently without cries and scandals. When they returned, everything resumed again, and one day Olivia couldn't take it anymore. At the advice of an elderly neighbor, she called a priest to bless the apartment. The priest said they were living in an unclean place and that they needed to protect the child. After he left, it was a peaceful evening, and nothing foreshadowed trouble. Olivia was preparing to welcome her husband back from a business trip. She put her son in her bedroom. and she herself was cooking. It was late when she realized she was out of flour, so she ran to the neighbors. After chatting for a bit, they all suddenly heard an inhuman, terrifying scream, followed by silence. Olivia and the neighbors quickly rushed upstairs to her apartment. What the mother saw left the deepest impression on her life. Her little son lay on the bed, arms outstretched, his entire body covered in bites, his eyes filled with horror. Running to the child, the mother found that he wasn't breathing. The examination revealed multiple human bites on the child's body. They conducted an investigation, which concluded that the parents were completely innocent of his death, and the woman had an alibi. The boy cried only when she was talking to the neighbors upstairs. The case was classified as unsolved in secret documents, and to this day the source of the bites has not been identified. Later, Olivia and her husband confided in me as a big secret that they had learned about the apartment. 10 years ago, a man committed suicide in it, accused of pedophilia, and to avoid punishment and trial, and then torment in prison, he decided to shoot himself before his arrest. Olivia now believes in mysticism. She found no other explanations for her child's death. The police couldn't find any either. Every day my friend cries for her child. They sold the Eerie apartment, and they sold it to people who didn't have children. Throughout my life, as fate would have it, I often heard stories about the mystical. I've encountered it myself a couple of times, so I unquestionably believe in it. But whether you'll believe what I'm about to write is up to you. This is about my father's relative who lives in the Far East, and we rarely see each other. My father still sends letters in envelopes, and so does she. But once she didn't write for a long time, and then a letter came that shocked us all. It was her handwriting. She's a serious woman, raised 2 sons, buried her husband, holds a serious position, and doesn't particularly like jokes. After the letter, my father called her, and she confirmed everything that was written there. Let me tell you the part of the letter that shook us all. We bought a country house. We searched for a long time, but finally found what we needed. As soon as the documents were signed, we immediately started renovation and remodeling with the remaining amount. And the boys helped me a lot. And then it was the basement's turn. The previous owner showed it to us briefly, but we saw that it was just huge. When we went there, everyone immediately felt uneasy. A strange musty smell, dampness. It was just horribly unpleasant there. And even in the house itself, we all felt an inexplicable discomfort. In one corner of the basement, there was a huge pile of old stuff, and we decided to take it all out and burn it. My boys carried things while I burned them in the backyard. There was everything there. A broken set of 3 cups, old dresses, trousers, a Soviet-era iron, probably from the 60s, a chest with some already rotten junk. It all smelled horribly of dampness and mold. It felt like it had been there for at least a decade. And then I hear my sons calling me. I go to them, and I see the corner is dismantled, and there's a tightly nailed door in the floor with a plaque on it, the letters worn off. We tried to open it, curious about what was inside. The boys wielded 2 crowbars, and after about 20 minutes, they finally opened it. And you know what? We all recoiled. There were 2 open coffins, and inside them were remains. It was hard to determine their gender, all shriveled up, gray. I screamed. Alex pulled me out of there, and we called the police. And from that very day, our lives were no longer peaceful. Creaks, knocks. One night we had to sleep in the house, and in the end we all slept in one room. It was as if stones were falling on the floor in the living room. The walls were cracking, as if the house was alive and moving. But that's not the scariest part. One night at 3 a.m., in my apartment, I woke up because someone pushed me hard from the wall side. I almost fell to the floor. Not fully awake, I didn't understand what was happening, and when I looked into the corner of the bed, I couldn't even scream. There was a very tall man looking at me, right up to the ceiling, with such anger that it seemed he was about to attack, and I blacked out. I had to take tranquilizers for a week afterward. My sons confessed that they saw something too, Alex during the day while having lunch, Donovan in the evening. I ran to the church, to the priest. He said that if there were coffins, then surely there were graves, and we disturbed them and burned the things. Now they are haunting us. He blessed our apartment, even took us to bless the house, the basement. He read something funeral right there. He said they needed to be reburied. I called the former owner who sold us the house. He said he lived there for only 4 years, and nothing happened. He didn't even touch the junk, so he didn't know what surprise was in the basement. Said the police came and asked about it too. When I told him about the find, he was also shocked. He said he bought the house from a guy 50 years ago, only knew that the house belonged to his parents, and he was very ill, couldn't take care of the large premises. After visiting the priest, everything calmed down. We cemented the place where we found the coffins. And then our police reported that the bodies belonged to the former owners of the house, who died 10 years ago. Apparently by their son's will, they were buried in their beloved house. First the father, and then the mother quickly died. Documents were found. There was no crime. The case was quickly closed. And since the man was no longer alive and no relatives were found, we decided to rebury the remains in a regular cemetery as appropriate. After all this, I had a dream. An elderly man and woman are sitting in our living room with suitcases, looking sad. The man looks up, looks at me, and says something like, "We didn't want to move, but apparently we'll have to. Thank you for helping us find a new home," and that's it. They examine the living room one last time, stand up and leave. I called the man who sold us the house again, asked what the former owner of the house looked like. He said, "I only remember one thing. He was horribly tall, almost to the ceiling, and I understood who came to our apartment. Was angry that they took the parents out of the coffins. After reburial, I sometimes go to their cemetery and bring flowers, asking for forgiveness for disturbing them, and it seems like we feel differently in our new house. Calmer somehow, more comfortable, cozier. We're thinking of moving there permanently in the fall once we finish the repairs."